On a moonless night, when the highway seems endless and the world outside your window turns into a blur of shadows, most travelers never imagine that someone might be watching them from the darkness, studying their routine, memorizing their stops, waiting for the moment when their guard slips. But along America's loneliest stretches of road, a silent predator turned the ordinary act of driving into a deadly gamble. This is the story of the highway hunter, a phantom who blended into the flow of traffic like any other stranger until the instant he struck. The tale begins with an engine humming on an empty interstate, a driver tapping their fingers on the steering wheel, unaware that another pair of headlights has been following for miles, not close enough to alarm, not far enough to lose sight. For years, missing travelers were dismissed as runaway cases, accidents, or people who simply vanished into the endless expanse of roadside America. Families were told there were no clues, no suspects, no reason to think foul play was involved. But behind those quiet disappearances was a methodical monster who knew the highways better than any map. He understood the blind spots of camera systems, the remote rest stops forgotten by time, and the fractured communication between police departments stretched across multiple states. In the beginning, no one suspected that the abandoned vehicles, scattered belongings, and silent cell phones were the work of the same man. But survivors whispered about a stranger who offered help with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Truckers remembered a tall figure standing too long at gas stations, scanning the crowd. And a single detective, late at night, staring at a wall of cold cases, began to notice something others had missed. Each disappearance lined up like breadcrumbs along a single highway corridor. That was when the myth became real. The highway hunter was no random killer. He was patient, calculated, and almost invisible. As we dive deeper into this chilling journey, we uncover how one man turned the open road into his hunting ground, how he evaded capture for years, and how the truth finally surfaced after a mistake he never intended to make. This is not just a crime story. It's a warning about the places we trust, the people we pass, and the unseen dangers that might be only a few car lengths behind us. It started with a disappearance so ordinary the police barely reacted. A young woman named Melissa Carr was driving home after visiting a friend in another state. She texted her mother that she'd be home in about 2 hours. She never arrived. The next morning, a state trooper found her car parked neatly on the shoulder of Highway 47, engine off, keys still in the ignition. Her purse sat on the passenger seat, phone on the dashboard, and a half-finished bottle of water in the cup holder. There were no signs of struggle, no broken glass, no footprints, nothing to suggest foul play. Investigators assumed she'd run away, or perhaps gotten into another vehicle willingly. Weeks passed before her family convinced police to dig deeper. But by then, rain had washed away any physical evidence. For years, Melissa's case sat in a dusty file, labeled as missing possible voluntary absence. It wasn't until forensic technology advanced nearly a decade later that technicians returned to her car and discovered microscopic traces of unknown male DNA on the driver's side door handle DNA that would later match several other unsolved cases across different states. By then, Melissa had long been forgotten by the media and was just another name among thousands of missing persons. What no one realized at the time was that Melissa wasn't the first victim. She was only the first one who left behind a clue. The man who took her was already refining his methods, learning how to vanish without leaving a shadow behind. Melissa's disappearance was the beginning of a dark pattern, one that would take investigators years to recognize and even longer to understand. But on that quiet night, somewhere along the cold stretch of asphalt, the highway hunter had chosen her, and the world had not yet learned to fear his presence. At first, the cases looked completely unrelated. A trucker who stopped for fuel and never returned to his rig. A young couple whose car was found with both doors wide open. A college student whose tire blew out on a remote interstate. Different states, different circumstances, different victims. Yet they all shared one haunting similarity. Each vanished along a major highway with no explanation. Law enforcement agencies were overwhelmed with local cases and rarely communicated across state lines. Files collected dust, investigators changed departments, and small clues were overlooked because no one saw the bigger picture. The highway hunter relied on this chaos. He stalked roads that cut across multiple jurisdictions, striking where police rarely spoke to each other. But eventually, subtle patterns began to emerge. Analysts reviewing cold cases noticed unusual consistencies. Vehicles always found facing the correct direction. Belongings left inside, as though the victims simply stepped out for a moment. And trace evidence wiped almost perfectly clean. In several cases, faint tire marks were found near abandoned vehicles, marks belonging to a large truck or modified pickup. Witness reports, once dismissed, began to carry weight. A quiet man offering help to stranded motorists. A tall figure lurking near broken-down cars. The same vague description repeated by travelers hundreds of miles apart. And then came the discovery that changed everything: a distinctive blueprint, found at 3 separate crime scenes in 3 different states. It was one in a unique pattern, almost like the sole had been cut and re-glued. Suddenly, investigators realized they weren't looking at random disappearances. They were tracking a single predator who traveled freely along the open road, choosing victims who were isolated, vulnerable, or simply unlucky. The asphalt wasn't just a surface. It was a trail of breadcrumbs left by a ghost. For years, rumors circulated about a woman who escaped the highway hunter. Most dismissed her story as exaggeration, until investigators finally tracked her down. Her name was Laura Jensen, and she had spent years trying to forget what happened. One stormy night, her car broke down on Interstate 97. She remembers pulling over, turning on her hazard lights, and calling roadside assistance. While waiting, a pickup truck slowed beside her. The driver was calm, almost overly polite. "Need a hand?" he asked. She declined, telling him help was already on the way. He nodded, smiled, and drove off into the rain. She relaxed for a moment until his truck appeared again in her rearview mirror. He parked behind her, headlights blinding her through the storm. She stepped out to speak to him, thinking he might be trying to warn her of something. But the moment she approached, she felt something was wrong. The tone of his voice had changed, colder, calculating. She backed away, but he lunged, grabbing her wrist with impossible strength. She fought, slipping on the wet pavement, but managed to break free when another car appeared in the distance, its headlights slicing through the darkness. The hunter vanished instantly, driving off without a trace. Years later, Laura still trembled discussing the incident. She described his face as ordinary, forgettable. And that's what scared me most. Her account became the first real insight investigators had about the highway hunter's behavior. He was patient. He studied his victims, and he wasn't afraid to strike twice. Her testimony would later match details described in multiple, unsolved cases, proving that the same man had been prowling highways for far longer than anyone imagined. Highways are designed for speed, efficiency, and anonymity. Tens of thousands of vehicles pass through each day, and no one remembers the faces of the strangers they cross paths with. The highway hunter understood this better than anyone. He targeted locations where help was far away, where cell phone signals disappeared, and where cameras were non-existent. Investigators later mapped his activity and discovered he favored long, desolate stretches between small towns, places with no gas stations for miles, where travelers were forced to stop if they had car trouble, rest stops with broken lights, abandoned exits leading to dirt roads, bridges where the sound of passing trucks drowned out everything else. He even adapted his methods to each area. In rural regions, he posed as a mechanic or trucker, offering roadside assistance. In busy stretches, he blended in by acting like an ordinary driver, making a quick stop. He learned local patrol schedules, memorized when police shifts changed, and avoided areas with heavy surveillance. Witnesses often recalled seeing a truck with a faded tarp or a modified trailer, but no one thought twice. On highways, people look past each other. They focus on reaching their destination, not the dangers lingering in the periphery. That indifference gave the hunter his advantage. He didn't need to chase his victims. They stopped for him. By the time authorities realized that multiple disappearances lined up with specific highway markers, he had already moved on, shifting his territory hundreds of miles away. The roads were his camouflage, his escape routes, and his hunting ground. Every mile of asphalt made him stronger, harder to trace, and nearly impossible to catch. Detective Samuel Riggs was the first to suspect that something larger was happening. Late one night, reviewing decades of cold cases, he noticed a familiar layout. Vehicles found in similar conditions, victims last seen on road trips, and unexplained disappearances along major interstates. Curiosity pushed him to gather files from other states, and what he found chilled him. Despite geography, the similarities were undeniable. Victims vanished near rest stops, underpasses, and breakdown lanes. Some were seasoned travelers, others first-time drivers. What tied them together was location and the eerie neatness of every crime scene. Riggs pinned case markers to a massive board stretched across his office wall. When he connected them with a pen, a single line emerged, a corridor cutting through 5 states. It was the exact route used by commercial truckers and long-distance haulers. Riggs alerted federal investigators, who initially dismissed the theory. Serial killers rarely maintain mobility across such large distances. But after running a deeper analysis, the FBI began uncovering clues they had overlooked. Overlapping timeframes, matching tire impressions, and sightings of a similar vehicle near multiple scenes. Agencies finally began talking to each other, comparing notes, sharing evidence. A profile emerged: someone with a reason to travel frequently, someone used to long nights and empty roads. A job in trucking, delivery, or roadside repair. As case after case was re-examined, a horrifying truth surfaced. This predator had been active for more than a decade. The highway hunter's victims weren't random. They were carefully chosen along the routes he traveled daily. Riggs' discovery sparked one of the largest multi-state investigations in highway crime history. And for the first time, law enforcement realized they weren't chasing a ghost. They were hunting a man who had perfected the art of disappearing. Profilers described the highway hunter as a nomadic predator, someone who thrived in isolation and found comfort in constant movement. Unlike other killers who linger in one region, he saw the open road as freedom and endless landscape where he could reinvent himself at any moment. Psychologists suggested he was highly intelligent, socially invisible, and deeply methodical. He didn't kill impulsively. He waited for the perfect moment. Every decision, from where he parked to how he approached victims, was calculated to minimize risk. Investigators believed he had a troubled past, likely involving childhood neglect, frequent relocations, and an unstable home environment. His comfort with highways hinted at a life spent drifting, perhaps raised by truckers, or moving from town to town, never forming real relationships. He chose victims who were vulnerable but not predictable. Stranded motorists, traveling students, long-distance drivers. People who would not be immediately missed or whose disappearances could be blamed on travel accidents. He learned to mimic helpful behavior, offering assistance, providing tools, pretending to be a good Samaritan. Most victims probably trusted him for the first few minutes. That trust was his weapon. Profilers also noted something chilling. He rarely left clues because he didn't need to rush. Highways gave him isolation, distance, and time. He operated in the open, but no one ever suspected the harmless man at the rest stop, sipping coffee or fixing his truck. Beneath that facade, however, was a compulsive need for control. He enjoyed choosing when the victim's journey ended. The road was his territory, his ritual, his identity. He wasn't just killing people, he was hunting them in the one place they felt safest. Understanding his psyche would later help investigators predict his next move. But by then, dozens had already vanished. For years, the highway hunter moved like a shadow until one night, he made a mistake. A dashcam. A simple, cheap, motion-activated dashcam installed in a college student's car. When her vehicle broke down on a narrow road, she sat inside waiting for help, unaware that the small camera was recording every moment. The footage showed rain battering the windshield, the girl checking her phone, and then headlights approaching slowly from behind. A figure stepped out of the truck, walking toward her with a false calmness. The camera captured only his silhouette, not his face. But the real breakthrough wasn't him. It was his vehicle. Investigators reviewing the footage noticed a rare detail. The truck had a distinctive aftermarket bumper and a custom metal bracket welded at an unusual angle. Only a handful of mechanics in the country installed that specific modification. Even more crucial was the faint glimpse of a tattoo on the man's wrist as he reached for her door handle, a sharp-edged symbol shaped like a broken arrow. The girl was taken, but the dashcam survived, ejected during the struggle and later discovered by hikers. When authorities analyzed the footage, they realized they had their first real lead in years. Forensic technicians enhanced the video, identifying the truck model, color, and likely year. A nationwide alert was issued, and mechanics were questioned. The tattoo, once analyzed, was traced to a small group of truckers known for custom road work. For the first time, investigators had a physical description, a vehicle type, and an identifiable mark on the killer's body. The highway hunter had slipped. And that small error, the kind that could only happen after years of reckless confidence, would ignite a manhunt unlike anything the interstate system had ever seen. With the dashcam evidence in hand, authorities launched a multi-state operation. Checkpoints appeared across major interstates. Patrol units inspected trucks, questioned drivers, and distributed printed flyers describing the custom bumper and the broken arrow tattoo. Truck stops became surveillance zones, with undercover officers watching for anyone who matched the vague profile. Anonymous tips poured in, some from frightened motorists, others from truckers who remembered a strange colleague who kept to himself and always drove at night. The FBI established a command center dedicated solely to the highway hunter case. Digital billboards flashed images of the suspect's truck. Mechanics were urged to report anyone requesting similar modifications. Still, the hunter managed to slip through the cracks. He avoided major roads, using rural back routes and old service trails. He ditched his trailer, repainted his truck, and altered his license plates. For months, he remained invisible. Investigators grew frustrated. Pressure mounted. The public demanded answers. But one tip changed everything. A warehouse owner reported seeing a truck matching the description parked behind an abandoned lot for several nights. When officers arrived, they found signs of someone living inside the truck: empty food containers, tools, maps, and a spare tire identical to those found at several crime scenes. Fresh tracks indicated the suspect had just left. He was still nearby. Patrol cars swarmed the area. Helicopters scanned the woods, and thermal cameras searched for movement. The hunter realized he was being hunted for the first time in his life. Instead of fleeing across states, he tried hiding locally, his first major tactical error. The noose tightened, and investigators knew it was only a matter of time before he slipped again. A severe storm rolled in the night. Authorities finally cornered him. Lightning split the sky as officers tracked his truck to a rural highway cutting through dense forest. When patrol cars surrounded him, he floored the accelerator, initiating a high-speed chase through rain-slicked roads. The storm made everything chaotic. Headlights blurred, sirens echoed through the trees, and the wet pavement turned each sharp turn into a near disaster. But the hunter drove like a man born on the road, swerving with precision, using the storm as his cloak. officers struggled to keep up. For miles, the chase continued, each minute raising the stakes. Then, a sudden flash of lightning illuminated a washed-out section of the highway. The hunter saw it too late. His truck skidded, lost control, and plunged into a ditch, slamming violently against a tree. Smoke billowed. The engine hissed. But he wasn't finished. He staggered out, drenched and bleeding, disappearing into the woods. Officers pursued on foot, flashlights cutting through the rain. The forest echoed with the sound of snapping branches and frantic footsteps. Finally, 2 deputies spotted him crouched behind a fallen log, trying to hide despite his injuries. Guns drawn, they ordered him to surrender. He didn't speak, didn't resist. He simply looked up with a calm, chilling emptiness, as though the chase had been a temporary inconvenience, not the end of his reign of terror. Handcuffed and dragged through the mud, he showed no emotion, no panic, no remorse. The highway hunter was finally captured. But for investigators, the true nightmare was only beginning, because they still didn't know how many victims lay forgotten along the roads he once ruled. With the highway hunter in custody, the nation exhaled. News stations broadcast his capture around the clock. Families of the missing prayed for answers. Investigators hoped he would break under pressure and reveal the full extent of his crimes. But he didn't speak, not during interrogation, not during his trial, not even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. When asked how many people he had taken, he only offered a faint, unsettling smile. Authorities combed through his belongings. Maps marked with strange symbols, journals containing cryptic notes, fragments of license plates, and souvenirs no one wanted to think about. Cold cases once considered hopeless were reopened. Patterns emerged, victims found near specific mile markers, others who vanished along his mapped routes. Some families finally received closure. Others were left with even deeper uncertainty. One chilling discovery stood out. Investigators found a list written in small, meticulous handwriting. At first glance, it appeared to be random names. But when cross-referenced with national databases, those names matched missing persons reports dating back more than 15 years. And the list was incomplete, ending abruptly as though he stopped writing mid-thought. Prosecutors secured multiple life sentences, but justice felt incomplete. Experts believe the true number of victims may never be known. Some bodies may never be found lost in forests, buried near old service roads, or abandoned in places where time has erased all evidence. Even today, as people drive long stretches of highway at night, a lingering fear remains. Rest stops feel a little too quiet. The darkness outside the headlights feels a little too thick. Because the highway hunter changed the way people see the open road. He proved that danger doesn't always hide in cities or alleyways. Sometimes it's just a few car lengths behind you, waiting. The story of the highway hunter doesn't end with his capture. It lingers like a shadow stretching over every mile of lonely road. Even with the man behind bars, the questions he left behind continue to haunt investigators and families alike. How many victims are still out there, waiting to be found? How many lives were stolen in silence, without a witness, without a trace? His crimes changed the way people look at the open road. What once symbolized freedom, adventure, and connection now carries an unsettling reminder that danger doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes it comes in the form of a pair of headlights behind you, a stranger offering help, or the quiet lull of a rest stop in the middle of nowhere. The hunter exploited the blind spots of the world, both the physical ones along dimly lit highways and the human ones in our instinct to trust. His story forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that evil often hides in plain sight, blending into the routines we take for granted. And though justice has been served, closure remains elusive, because some roads still hold secrets no one has uncovered. As you drive through the night, the world rushing past your windows, you might catch yourself checking the rearview mirror more often, not out of fear, but out of awareness. Because the highway hunter is more than a criminal. He's a reminder of how fragile safety can be, how quickly a normal trip can turn into a nightmare, and how important it is to protect those moments when we're most vulnerable. The asphalt remembers what he did, even if the world moves on. And in the quiet hours, when the highways are empty and the sky is dark, his legacy lingers in the shadows, an echo of the danger that once stalked America's open roads.